I wanted to make a video today to talk about anxiety for students, especially those of you who consider yourselves like pretty good students. And by good students, I mean not necessarily so much that you get like the highest score in all your tests or that you go to the best schools or whatever, but by good student, I mean if you're a student who takes sort of getting good grades and performing well on tests, homework, takes these things very seriously. And by that definition, I would definitely consider myself to have been a good student in the past when I was in school. For example, before major tests, I would just become very stressed, and I would really study hard. If I didn't get a good grade, I would feel that I let myself down, or that I let my parents, my family, or even my friends just let them down. And so, I was reading in the New York Times the other day that anxiety for students is at an all-time high in the U.S. And I sort of want to give my thoughts about that and sort of possible ways to address that, given the experience that I've had in dealing with my own anxiety issues. The first thing I wanted to talk about was what exactly is anxiety, and sort of a working definition of anxiety that I came up with over the years was that anxiety is really nothing more than tension. And if tension is really just when you have two opposing forces, and you have, if you imagine like a rope or a string, that if one thing is pulling in one way and then something else is pulling in another way, then you have tension in the rope as opposed to slack. And people, you would call people who, don't really care about tests, or, don't really put too much pressure on themselves, or slackers. And so this idea of tension versus slack is sort of, I think it's a good proxy for, this idea of being a good student. Yeah, so the question is, where does the tension come from when we are studying for tests and sort of trying to be a good student? And my personal take on this is that, on the one hand, you have two opposing forces. On the one hand, you sort of have a desire to do well. Um, a desire to do well as quantified by some metric, be it a test score, a grade, any sort of quantifiable number or metric that you can assign to how well you did. I would call that, force A. And in the other direction, force B is sort of this sort of underlying awareness. I would say it's like an unconscious awareness of the truth. And the truth being that perhaps we may not get that high score, or that if we don't study, that we will be exposed for being sort of very dumb students, or even very very lazy, or just not hardworking people. And so this opposing force is sort of I would call it a unconscious honesty. Yeah. So then you would have basically the desire to do well, which sort of arises from ego when you think about it, in that the ego sort of has a vision of itself of, okay, I'm a very good student, and I want everybody to think of me. I have an image of myself of being, very capable, and sort of living up to the expectations that others, as well as myself, all these people put on me. So that's force A. And then force B is sort of this underlying fear, possible awareness that, hey, maybe I'm not deserving of these accolades, or these sort of expectations, or maybe at least I'm not deserving of all this. I don't merit the sort of the name good student. And so these are the two opposing forces that that I identify in sort of the way that I think about it. So then the question is, what is the result of prolonged, continued tension in this way? Well, of course, we know that people often think that there's some tension necessary. We need some tension in our lives to sort of move ahead. So if you imagine that the rope is pulling like a rock or a boulder or something, and you sort of have to pull this rock to get it to go where you want to go in terms of where you want to go in your life. So for example, if I want to be a doctor, then I have to sort of study very hard to pass the tests and learn chemistry and all this stuff. Um, yeah. Whereas on the other hand, if you didn't pull this rope and the rope is just going slack, then of course you don't feel the tension, but at the same time you're not really going anywhere in your life. And so for some people, for many of us, I think we're sort of uneasy about that. We're sort of uncomfortable about the prospect that, hey, maybe my life is not going where I want it to, or is just not going anywhere. I'm not achieving my goals. I'm not sort of meeting the expectations that people and have of me, and even the expectations that I have for myself. So getting back to my question, what happens when this process keeps continuing? And it's one of those things where if you get a really good score on a test, then you feel good for that moment. But of course, there's always the next test, and there's always the next level. If you get into the best school, well, there's always the best graduate school. And once you get the best you graduate from the best graduate school, you have the most coveted, position, or you have, the faculty job that you want. So, I mean, this kind of process is it promotes this sort of continual tension, continuously just pulling, pulling, pulling. And what happens when we continually set our sights on sort of the next ego goal? Then you can imagine that this tension is just going to cause this rope to break at some point if the load is too heavy. So that's sort of the overall way that I think about tension. And I don't want to make this video too long. The one comment that I want to make about how to address this situation is that, going back to the analogy of there being slack in this rope and there being a rock and the rock is not moving anywhere. I mentioned this point about how a lot of us are uncomfortable, or we would feel uneasy at the prospect of this rock not going anywhere. If we imagined, oh my God, my life is not progressing, and if I don't do anything, of course, I'm just gonna flunk out of school and I'm just gonna be a big failure and all this stuff. So it sort of keeps us pulling this rock along with this tension string. But the interesting thing is, if you consider that we as people are actually not rocks, in the same way that if you imagine a seed of a plant, of a beautiful flower, for example, you plant the seed in the soil and you water it, and sort of the plant will grow of itself, right? It will bloom. It will sort of, it will have a stalk, and then it will bloom, and it will naturally reach its colors as long as it has the prerequisites of sunlight, water, adequate nutrition. And so I think a lot of us, we sort of mistakenly believe that we are more like rocks than we are like flowers, which is clearly incorrect if you think about it, because after all, we are living beings. And so sort of that's just I don't know, that's just one way that I want to leave you guys with. One way to think about tension and anxiety is that we don't always have to be pulling this rock around to where we want it to go. And in fact, sometimes we don't really know what is the best destination for where this rock should be pulled. But on the other hand, if I'm a seed and I'm planted in the soil, then actually I may not have any ego awareness of what my final shape will look like. But undoubtedly, the plant will sprout and it will grow, and you will reach whatever you were destined to become, if you give it the adequate nutrition and sort of loving care. And the key word here, of course, is love. So I think I'll leave you guys with that today. Just sort of my thoughts about anxiety for students, and maybe in the future I may make some more videos if I get some feedback on this idea, and if people are interested in hearing more. So anyways, I wish you guys best of luck and everything, and have a good day.